Good morning and welcome everyone to this session on gender justice in the platform economy. My name is Katja Schnellecke, I'm from the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, and I'm moderating the session today. It is evident that we have not adequately leveraged the opportunities of the digital transition for the advancement of gender equality in the world of work. On the contrary, there's overwhelming evidence that the promise of flexi-work that the platform economy initially offered has turned out to be an illusion. Platformisation has not opened up empowering flexi-work opportunities that address traditional constraints to women's effective participation in the economy. Rather, it has intensified gendered precarity, particularly in the majority world. Evidence from around the world suggests that digital labor platforms have ended up reinforcing gender-based discrimination, gendered occupational segregation, gendered pay gaps, and the risk of workplace harassment. Together with our partner IT for Change, we started looking into these issues at the beginning of the year and have since held consultations to gather key demands from over 50 feminist scholar practitioners, trade unionists and activists from Africa, Asia-Pacific, Latin America and the EU for a gender-just platform economy and respective reforms. We will discuss some of these findings today, but before we start, I'd like to introduce you to our distinguished panelists. With me here in Berlin is Charlotte Schlüter. She's a policy officer for gender equality from the German Trade Union Confederation. Online, we are joined by Rani. She's a senior economist from the research department at the International Labour Organization. And we're also joined by Nandini Chami, deputy director and fellow from our partner IT for Change. Before we start with a round of questions to the panelists, just a little bit of housekeeping. After we discuss with the panelists, there's time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, any comments you would like to raise, just write them down and my colleagues will go around with a microphone for the Q&A session so you can ask your questions directly. My first question goes online to Nandini. Nandini, though labor exploitation and the platform work arrangements affects all workers, there are unique gender dimensions that impact all women workers. Could you share insights on how platform work arrangements are exacerbating the problems of gender discrimination and exploitation in the labor market? And what are the most critical challenges in this regard?
Thank you, Katya. Good morning. I hope you can all hear me. So I think that we are all familiar with the precarity and the problems for foundational labor guarantees that the platform economy poses. But I would like to focus on, in my response now, about some specific insights we learned from our multi-country research study on the unique challenges or problems of women workers in the platform economy. I would like to make 4 points in this regard. So number one, I think it's a problem of invisibility. A lot of the debate in the public domain tends to focus on the problems of ride-hailing and food delivery workers, especially in Global South contexts. But this is a platform economy sector which has only 10% of the workforce as women. And as one of the consultation participants from the European Union observed in the roundtables that we had done for the research, the platform economy and workers in platform economy are not just about Uber and Uber workers. We have to look at other domains where women are. And a lot of women also are engaged in online micro work and in home-based online services. The women who are engaged, they tend to be invisible and more atomized. The second issue is about how the initial idea that when the informal economy gets formalized, traditional problems of pay, job quality, and labor rights that women workers have faced will automatically go away through a formalization of the informal. This analysis has not really borne out. As one of the research participants from Brazil said, in fact, gendered informalization is now getting a platform update. That is the situation currently. And to give a very specific sectoral example from the Asia Pacific, one of the participants observed that itemization of tasks in home-based cleaning and beauty services has not led to professionalization. In fact, when these workers, women workers, go to clients' homes to deliver these services in platform-based domestic work and beauty services, there is still a lot of traditional expectations about how you have to go the extra mile and render services that the client expects you to. So there is no real professionalization. And from Africa, participants also observed about how, in the context of domestic work, when in a platformizing context, you actually deal with clients who are completely unknown. There are new challenges in bargaining, which were not traditionally there because you would go through referrals of other domestic workers, or you would have more embedding in the local networks, which allowed for a different form of bargaining in the informal economy. This is not to celebrate feudal work relationships in informal economy. That is not what I'm suggesting. But the fact that the formalization of the informal has not necessarily improved bargaining power for workers, particularly women workers, is what I'm trying to underscore. The third issue is about direct and indirect gender discrimination in algorithmic work management systems. One of the participants from the European Union consultations observed how in most non-platform work settings, there are legal safeguards against gender discrimination where you don't disclose data about gender in recruitment processes. But this is not the same kind of protection that is available to workers on platform service sectors. Secondly, when it comes to indirect gender discrimination, the design of platform algorithmic work management systems is often blind or insensitive to the unique challenges that women face in participating in the labor market. For instance, in Latin America, participants observed how when due to care work burdens, women have to take more days off or they have to refuse more jobs. There is no particular opt out through which they can ensure that the algorithm will not penalize them by not giving them future jobs. Similarly, the few women workers who work in ride hailing pointed out how in the peak hours where surge pricing might benefit their returns, they are not actually able to drive during those hours because this coincides with work at home. And not last but not the least, the design of platforms is often insensitive to the concerns of gender minorities and non-binary people, particularly in the case of Latin American platforms that use facial recognition to let workers log in, where workers report that they are not able to log in. I come to my final point, which is that when we look at like the complete violation of labor guarantees, including guarantees for maternity and other social protection needs of women, there's also this older problem of workplace harassment that is amplified, and platforms are completely unaccountable in this regard. From Africa, we had reports of women workers talking about how there may be design of panic buttons and calls for help that are there on the platform, but they don't generally work in a crisis in terms of ensuring there is, timely help for the women workers. I would like to stop here and we can return to some of the issues later in the discussion, I hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nandini. You already mentioned the consultations and the results, some of the results from the consultations we did with the majority world, but also in the EU. Can you tell us very briefly what are the key demands of women platform workers when it comes to working conditions in the platform economy?
Yes. So there were three key demands. The first aspect was that foundational labor guarantees have to be available for all workers, and it cannot be contingent on an employment test, which proves the employer-employee relationship, because these traditional tests don't really work for those platform work arrangements where women are currently present in. Secondly, they wanted techno designs specifications to be made compulsory for platform companies, so that we have ways to enforce design is not like promoting direct or indirect algorithmic gender discrimination. And this means we have to have a way to hold transnational platform companies and in their international value chains, especially accountable. And last but not the least, most of the participants recognized that the issue that we are facing is not just about labor conditions for platform workers, but it's about the digital economy model we are promoting. How can we promote a digital economy model where women workers are not stuck in low value segments of the economy and they can get meaningful opportunities? And how can we return to traditional ideas that the labor movement has always had about ensuring workers have control over the means of production? What would it take to reinvent a platform cooperativism that works for women workers, particularly in the majority world? And how would we be able to incentivize such initiatives and underwrite them with public support? So these were some of the demands.
Thank you so much, Nandini. Coming back into the room to Charlotte, thank you so much for being here. Charlotte, how can unions respond to the gender challenges that Nandini just described that we have in the platform economy? And what policy reforms and frameworks are unions proposing to improve the situation of platform workers and women platform workers in particular?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question and for your invitation. I'm so happy to be here. And maybe up front, as women in the German Trade Union Confederation, or short form DGB, we were 4 years ago, we brought in a political motion on our women conference at the DGB, in which we kind of addressed the challenges of the digitalization for women and also in platform work. And we were still kind of torn between the potential chances for women and the risks. And I think what we now see is that also the analysis of Nandini already showed that we rather see a reproduction and intensification of gender inequalities in the labor market through digitalization, through AI, and also new forms of work like platform work. And as labor unions, our job, of course, is to address these challenges and to see that we can regulate this kind of work, so we have better work for women, better work for workers in general in the platform economy, and to also kind of promote gender equality in the labor market. Mm-hmm. So this is our job as labor unions. The main problems we see in the platform economy in general, but also for women, is that the business model with which platform operators work with is the claimed self-employment of worker, and often a misclassification happens. Platform workers are oftentimes in work arrangement that are more like dependent deployment, but by claiming self-employment, basic worker rights are undermined, and also social protection that is very important for women, right? So this is something that we think has to be addressed, and we also need protection against discrimination and violence. This is a very important point from a gender perspective, and also better access of labor unions and worker representatives to organize platform workers. The EU Platform Directive that has been adopted by the EU last year offers a regulatory framework, and we are very happy that we have this regulatory framework. I don't know whether people in this room are aware of it, but the labor unions had a great part, or took a great part in getting this framework. There was a massive opposition of platform operators in the EU, and we are really happy that it is a success of the labor union movement in the EU that we have this directive now. It's not perfect, but it is something that we can work with, and that is likely to bring improvements for platform workers and also women platform workers. One key element of the platform directive is that it kind of shifts the burden of proof for determining the employee status. So if we have certain criteria that for dependent employment is just assumed, and it is up to the platform operator to prove otherwise. And that, of course, also kind of shifts a bit the power to the people, let's say. A second very important element of the EU Platform Directive is that it sets clear boundaries for the processing of personal data and imposes quite extensive transparency obligations. It, for example, prohibits the processing of particularly sensitive personal data, which are very prone to discrimination. This can also bring improvements for women with regard to the automated decision-making on platforms. And third, another very important point of the directive is that labor unions are actually now allowed to act on behalf of platform workers. And that, of course, really can help platform workers to better assert their rights, for example, in case of discrimination, because for a woman alone, it's very difficult if she kind of discovers discrimination or assumes that there's a case of discrimination, it's very hard for an individual alone to assert her right and to take action against it. But if she has a labor union or a work council behind her, this gets much easier, right? Assuming there is kind of worker representatives in this field. This is another kind of question. So we see some improvements, and for us, as DGB, we're now really working on the implementation, or we were kind of lobbying for the implementation in Germany. We have 1 more year in Germany to implement the directive, and we will closely monitor this process as DGB, and also make sure that it's implemented in a social and gender just way. Yeah. So far from my side.
Thank you so much. Going back online to Uma. Uma, thank you so much for being here. I would like to ask you how we can ensure decent working conditions for women platform workers. And from your point of view, what reforms do we need in platform work environments to address gender discrimination and exclusion?
Thank you so much, Katya, for inviting me for this discussion and for having me over. I'm going to pick up on some of the points that Nandini has raised and take it from there, because that's something quite important. And I think before I sort of answer your questions, I also want to make us realize that, platforms have penetrated almost every sector of the economy, and it's irrespective of whether it's women or men who are working in these sectors. And the second thing is that in developing countries per se, you have a lot of these workers who were earlier working in the informal economy. And as Nandini very rightly said, what happens for many of these workers in developing countries where you don't have institutions, very strong ones, you find more of the precaritization of these workers. And the question is, how do we actually address this issue, which is age-old in a way? Whether you're talking about discrimination, whether you're talking about disparities that exist between genders, this is something that has always been there. I think the first point that we need to tackle within this discussion is, how do we value women's work? Because the biggest problem is the undervaluation of women's work, even in the traditional labor market. So valuing women's work becomes very important. And in this context, I would also like to say there's also a pitting that happens between the same work that women in developing countries do and developed countries do, And you find that the conditions are far more worse and become more precarious because there's a replaceability element that has come in where global North women workers are being replaced by global South women workers without addressing the undervaluation issue. So I think that's something that we need to do. The second point I would like to raise is, it's we need to go beyond the so-called classification of uh, workers, whether it's employees or employed. I think we need to really broaden that, and I'm very glad to hear that the key demands, one of the key demands that has come from platform workers is a foundational labor guarantee. That is, irrespective of whether you're classified as a self-employed or employee, you should get all the benefits. And I think this becomes very fundamental because otherwise, platform business model will always find its way through to see, what can be done. How do we not classify them so that it doesn't fall within the purview? That's exactly what they do in the physical service agreement, right? And they say that you are either an independent contractor, self-employed, or a driver partner, or a rider partner, or a delivery partner. So that's very nice for them to say, oh, that's not my responsibility. And if at all it's a responsibility, that's the responsibility of the worker himself or somebody else. So to get away from it, it's important to say a worker, irrespective of the status, needs to get all the labor guarantees. And I think the only way you can get around this is two forms, according to me. One form is the regulation, where legislations come in and you say that irrespective of this, these provisions should be provided. Or the second way is through a collective bargaining agreement where the platform, the unions get together at the country level or at the city level or the state level, try to see what could be an arrangement that can be done and who takes care of the responsibility in that entire process. I think I would say these two would be the most important. The third thing I would like to highlight has now come up in any of the discussion is that, what the platform business model has done is it has raised a revenue mechanism where workers are asked to pay a commission fee for accessing work. And this is against the Private Employment Agency Convention 191 of the ILO, which prohibits any agency, private agency, to charge any type of fee from the workers. So I think this is also something head on that has to be taken up and to resolve, saying that workers cannot be charged any kind of a fee. Now, coming to the question around discrimination. Now, there again, I feel collective bargaining rights and social dialogue plays a very important role because what we need is a very clear, not a top-down approach in platform design, but a bottom-up approach. And everybody needs to be part of the table in designing what that particular platform looks like, what are the parameters and indicators, what should be allowed, what should not be allowed, and how do you, and even if you want an algorithm, you need to have a transparency about the indicators that we use as part of it. I think you are based in one of the best countries in the world at the moment as you have this discussion, because Germany is one of the countries which has been quite proactive in using the GDPR, and also it has a number of other employment rights, which it brings it very neatly, which prohibits data collection of workers, right? So if you can do that for traditional industries, then we think about having a very good example for the platform, saying, okay, platform data can be used for certain things, but not to monitor, control, and punish workers. So I think there are some very good experiments within the traditional economy with digitalization and algorithms that can be utilized in the platform workplace. And there are lots of interesting legislation at the country level, especially in Europe, which could be pulled in to see how could they be applied within the platform. So I would say, I think while we look for overall regulation at the global level. We do have something at the EU level, which is a very good step forward, but that alone is not sufficient. While we wait for a global regulation, we can think about other innovative mechanisms that countries have adopted and to see how we can think them through. But very clearly, for me, technology itself is not inherently problematic. But the way we utilize it, the way we try to tailor it for our needs, that becomes very important. And I think that is where there's a chance to have a lot of social dialogue, and work organizing becomes very important to basically make them aware about what the issues are and how to actually negotiate this space. I think that's a big step that we take.
Thank you so much, Uma, for your intervention. I think now it's time for questions and comments from the audience. So if you have any questions, if you want to act on anything that you heard so far, if you want to make an intervention, now's the time. My colleagues will go around with a microphone. So if you would like to say something, if you would like to ask something to the panelists, please raise your hand. And then the microphone will come to you. Yeah, just over there. And if you could briefly introduce yourself, that would be really nice.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Miriam Oliver. I work at the GIZ on the topic of platform economy. And so I have a question, I guess, for everyone in the room. And that is sort of, we see unions as a sort of beacon of hope, and I totally agree with that. But we are speaking about women workers both in the global majority, but also here in Europe, who might not even understand themselves as platform workers or even identify with the term of platform workers. And so a question that I've sort of been asking myself is, what is the role of unions in then bringing those women workers to come together in organizations, in groups, ideally in unions, and to sort of understand themselves as as a group of workers who do have rights and do have an option to negotiate and determine their futures in the platform economy. So I'm quite curious to understand, how do we take that next step?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions in the room at the moment? Then I'm turning to my colleague Marine, who's also online. Marine, do we have any questions in the chat yet that you want to read out?
Hi. No, we don't have any questions in the chat.
Okay, then I would give the question about the role of the unions back to the panel, and maybe, Charlotte, we can start with you on that.
Thank you so much for your question. I feel like this question it's basically a question of consciousness raising, right? And I feel this is a problem that we face, like as labor unions face, with regard to women in general. Like, I wouldn't say that women are the problem. I would say the unions do have a part in this, because women tend to work in fields that have much less tradition of class struggle, right? We are really well organized in the metal industry, and this is like those are male-dominated fields of work, and labor unions stepped in much later in women-dominated fields of work, like, for example, the care sector, right? And I feel this is a problem we general face, and kind of this raising this understanding of being a worker that can kind of step in and fight for their rights. And with regard to platform work, we have further challenges of a lot of migrant workers, we have language barriers, we have this atomized work, right, individualized workers. I would say we also have a difference between gig and crowd work, right? And this is something we have to deal with. And I would say that the EU Platform Directive can also help here a little bit, because it kind of obliges platforms to provide communication channels for the platform workers that cannot be monitored and that need to be accessible by labor unions and work councils. So platform workers can actually connect, they can communicate, they can be informed about their rights, for example, by work representatives, and this might actually bring improvements. I also want to briefly point out, because this also has been said already by Nandini, that we see differences between the sectors also in platform work that are dominated by men and women, because if you look at the hail riding sector and the food delivery sector, workers are kind of visible to each other in the public space, and they are also visible to the public, right? And we do have public debate on their working conditions. We see improvements. A lot of the hail riding workers in Germany are now in dependent employments, and they have basic worker rights. And we also have organizations by the labor unions. In women-dominated fields, for example, the domestic sector, we are far from that. There's also no debate. And of course, we have problems as labor unions in general of organizing the sectors, the sector of domestic work, not just the platform kind of side of it, but it's like in general very informalized work, and it's very, very hard to access this sector. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Charlotte.
But we are on it.
That's very reassuring. Thank you so much. Nandini or Yuma, do you want to come in on that? Yuma, I see you nodding. Please go ahead.
Nandini, do you want to go first? I'm fine too.
You could go ahead, Uma, and I can come in after you. Okay. I think you had a point, yeah.
Yeah, thanks a ton. Thanks a lot for this very good question. And I also would like to respond and continue what Charlotte had said. I think one thing I do want to say is that, yeah, Germany, for the ride-hailing, things would have improved. It's also because of the kind of institutional mechanism you have in place, also the collective bargaining agreements that have come in that help. Now, this is not the story in the rest of the world, and surely not the story in the global south. So let's have that in mind. I just want to bring, this is largely based on the research we have done at the ILO. I want to bring out 2 points, and let me start with the second point, and then I go to the first. Let me get to the point of the domestic workers. The whole issue around invisibility, the whole issue about atomization. I think Nandini also did mention about that. And I think this is true of all of the informal economy workers in the global south. But what we have, and this is where countries in the global north can learn from us, is we have historically tried to organize informal economy workers, and especially the domestic workers. We've had a domestic workers union, and which resulted in the International Domestic Workers Federation, IDWF, which further took over the entire discussion of a convention for domestic workers, which was passed in 2011. That was almost 3 decades of fight that we've had. But the point is, these are again atomized, dispersed workers working in the private households, did not have a voice, but we could bring it together. How did we bring them together? I think this is where we can learn for the platform work. What were the processes? How did we mobilize workers? How did we go about doing it? Now, linked to that is my first point based on the work we have done is on the online platform work. And this is where the question comes up, which one of the colleagues asked. Many of them do not think that it's platform work, do not think that they can be unionized or organized. But there are lots of these chat groups that exist, Reddit groups that exist, Turk-Opticon groups that exist, where a lot of workers, irrespective of gender, go there, put down what all their problems are, but also provide solutions to one another. I would say unions could actually utilize this space to mobilize these workers, also make them aware what the issues are, and then bring it up front to fight for their rights? What are the issues that have to be dealt in? So I do think that a lot of things look invisible for us, but you can use the same technology to mobilize, organize, and get them going. And I think we know of a lot of very good examples that have come out. There's been a digital picket line in the UK, successful, even with a Supreme Court ruling, right? So, how do you use the digital technologies for workers to actually get them to, organize and bring out their rights? Finally, I do want to say one thing which I forgot to mention is the role of the consumers, which was mentioned. I forget who was it, whether it was Nandini or Charlotte. And according to me, that's a very strong and a powerful tool that we have. I think the Greek incidents in 2022 or 2021, I forget the year, they were successful in boycotting delivery. And they brought about a change for the delivery workers in Athens. So, the power of the consumers also plays a role here, where you come down and ask yourself, hey, do I want to have everything at my doorstep or at such a cheap price? And think about, what does this mean for the working conditions of the workers? Does that really take everything into consideration that I, as a worker, enjoy or not? And I think this realization also and awareness needs to be brought out. Thanks.
Yeah.
And unions can do that, actually. That's also a very powerful tool, according to me.
Thank you, Yuma. That was really interesting and important. Nandini, I saw you nodding, so do you want to jump in as well?
Yes, I agree with all the points that Uma has said. And I just want to share like 3 very short examples of what we can learn from examples in the global south of how to challenge this problem of the devaluation of women's work in the informal economy and dealing with the fact that women don't recognize themselves as workers. They think that, their primary role is that of like the household care work provider, and on the side, to avoid wasting their time, they are doing work to contribute to the income. In fact, these were the words we heard from a respondent working on Amazon Mechanical Turk, where this woman is a software engineer, but she can't participate in the labor market because of the way care work is structured. In India, as ILO research has shown, women spend one of most maximum number of unpaid care work hours compared to anywhere in the world. And this is a very important reality we have to grapple with in organizing women workers. So the first inspiring example I want to share from India is that in the last few years, as IT for Change, we are a civil society organization, but we do work with trade unions. And we have seen that within ride-hailing unions, there is a recognition that this typical gender blind spot needs to be reckoned with. And when the union lobbied for state-level social protection legislation, they strongly lobbied for a provision in the state of Karnataka that though in India there is no recognition of platform work as an employment relationship, this question remains unresolved in India, and there is a Supreme Court case going on. Within this Karnataka legislation, there is a point they are attempting to bring in that for the purposes of...
Nandini, you're breaking up. Okay, we lost her. That's a shame. We have time for one more question in the room and see if Nandini comes back in between. Do we have any other intervention?
My name is Andrea, and my interest is on a specific point that Yuma mentioned in her speech. It's about the undervaluation of women's work. And as I'm working on this for many years, I was very interested in that specific point. Could you highlight this a bit? What are the certain structures and mechanisms of undervaluation? How can we measure them, and what can we do against them? In my work, it's job evaluation, gender-just job evaluation, but I don't know if this works for platform economy as well. I'm not so sure. So could you highlight this specific point a bit for me? That would be fine.
Thank you so much. Yuma, I give the word back to you. You have about 2.5 minutes. I'm really sorry about that, but we need to finish on time here because the room is needed.
Okay, thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot. And I think that's a very important question, and I might do also a contrast with actually India and Germany at the moment. When we think about valuation of work, we are talking about what is the kind of remuneration that we give to the workers. And irrespective of the occupation, where women are dominated, you find systematically that their wages are very low. So let me take the case of a healthcare workers. So, suddenly in Germany, you find that there is a scarcity of healthcare work. Now, why is that scarcity coming in? Largely because you undervalue that work. You do not really respect that work, though it's very important, and you do not pay them accordingly. And you have very long working hours. You have about 10 hours to 12 hours, and workers do not get enough rest time. So the solution is often that instead of addressing the problem of trying to say, okay, these workers, the work intensity is very high, they're not really paid well, they end up working long hours, and the care they give is not up to the mark. You try to push them more and more, but now instead of addressing the problem, you're saying, let's replace these workers with Indian workers. So there's a agreement that has been signed between Germany and India to bring in more nurses and care services from India to Germany instead of trying to say, okay, we need really good qualified workers, let's pay them well, let's ensure that their working time is respected, and let's ensure that the care services that they provide by the end of the day is good for both the patient as well as the worker itself. So this is just an example to show how almost every work that the woman does is often getting undervalued in the process and not really respected. And now you bring in platforms because care work or care services, nursing is now provided through the platforms per se, which further precaritizes these workers. So I think the root problem is how do you value work? And how do you respect work and have a proper remuneration for it?
Thank you so much, Yuma, for your response. We are right on time. Perfect. So I really want to use the opportunity before we finish to thank our distinguished speakers. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for your interesting interventions. And I also want to use the opportunity to thank the Hans-Böckler Stiftung for having us and allowing us to bring this really important topic to the conference. And a very warm thank you to the translators. I didn't hear you, but I'm very sure that it was really helpful for people who were listening to you. And last but not least, a very warm thanks to our project partner IT for Change, and it's always a real pleasure to work with you. Thank you all for coming. I wish you all an interesting rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.